Sounds good.
Hi, everybody. My name's Laura Tui, and I'm the program coordinator at Leland Township Library. And on behalf of all four of your Leelanau County libraries, I wanted to say welcome to the folks who are joining us for the first time tonight, and also welcome back to our old friends. Before I turn things over to Abra and Evan, I just wanted to mention that while they're chatting, if you have a question, please feel free to type it into the chat, and they'll be answering as many of those questions as they can. And if for some reason they don't get to your question tonight, you can email me. My email is programs@lelandtownshiplibrary.org. And so, without further ado, I wanted to say welcome to Dinner with Friends, and I hope you will join me in welcoming chefs Abra Berens and Evan Hanczor. Maybe with the double hand wave.
Yeah.
Like to do. Hello, you guys.
Hello.
Let's
Well,
bring
Laura,
it.
thanks so much as always for making space for us and kicking off this conversation. When Laura and I were talking about this series and what we were going to do with it, we're sort of just talking about all of the different conversations that we were missing over a good meal, and missing our book clubs and missing all of those sorts of things. And so this is sort of where we landed, and I'm just so honored to have you here, Evan, because we don't actually know each other all that well. We sat together at one dinner, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I just left that meal with such a fondness for you and such an excitement about your work. And so this spring, when I saw Tables of Contents put out the community cookbook, I was like, oh, hell yeah, I'm checking this out. And then I was just like continually blown away by how wonderful it was. So it was so fun to cook through it, and I feel like a lot of excitement to just actually get to know you even better in this like quasi-public forum. But I wanted to start out and just say like, hey, welcome. Thank you to the Leelanau County Libraries for hosting this. And anyone who's been to any of these programs before knows just how grateful I am to the library system, everywhere, but specifically in rural Michigan, because they've been so supportive of me over the years, but also all of our communities, if they're in big cities or rural counties or suburban libraries. So it just really means a ton.
Yes.
And yeah, so I'm just so excited to get to chat and to talk. And, you helped kind of pick out you had suggested a couple of the recipes that we would do tonight. And I actually have never said this word out loud, so I'm a little bit nervous to say it out loud.
I've said it out loud to myself. That makes two of us though, but I think it's changua.
Changua, okay.
It's, I was so glad you picked it because this author, Naima Coster, I have her book here. We're doing an event on Wednesday on the Tables of Contents Instagram. And this is her second novel. She joined us in person for Tables of Contents back when we were doing these things in advance. So when you like gravitated towards that recipe, this book just came out. It's getting so much love. It's a really incredible story. I encourage everyone to check it out from the library. Maybe you could get the book and cook the dish alongside it as well. But yeah, it's just like a perfect timing for the recipe. And I feel like actually the weather and the season is perfect for it as well. It's like on that border between like winter and a spring dish. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it was so nice to read about it. And so for those of you who haven't seen the book yet, changua is a kind of soup for breakfast that her mother-in-law made for her when she was first visiting. And I gravitated towards it for two reasons. Three reasons. One, the introduction is beautifully written, and so that always feels really nice. But also, I wasn't confident that I was going to have time to make an elaborate meal for this, given what was coming up the day before. And I was like, perfect. I think there's 6 ingredients and I have all of them generally. And then thirdly, it's like soup for breakfast, which is newly one of my favorite things. I was turned on to having miso soup for breakfast by my friend Hitoko, and or like lentil soup and things like that in the morning. I just really love. So it's been really a treat to get to taste that. And for those of you who haven't read through the recipe, it's basically a mixture of milk and water that you bring to a scald, add some garlic, cilantro, and scallion, and then effectively just poach a couple of eggs in it, and then sop it up with crusty bread. And so that's what I'll be eating throughout the course of the dinner. And then, like my dad always said, it's uncivilized to have a meal without a glass of wine. And so we are lucky enough. Bel Lago, who those of you in Leelanau County know, is sponsoring the series. So it's their dry Riesling that Sarah decided to pair with it. So anyway, just getting that kind of out of the way. But I was hoping that you could talk a little bit more, because I don't know that much about the series, and how you find authors, how the food and the literature sort of work together in your series.
Yeah, totally. Well, it starts back when I was in college, when I was studying poetry. I was an aspiring poet and writer at the time, and I took a class that was called Last Call. And it was this professor, Dale Edmonds, his last class teaching. I was at Tulane in New Orleans. So Last Call, bars, New Orleans, all of it went together. And we read basically all of his favorite books over the past 35 years of his teaching. And it was when we were reading The Sun Also Rises that I was sort of noticing all these meals that were popping up in the book that I really wanted to eat. And I wasn't a professional cook, but I liked cooking, for myself and for friends. And that sort of seed of the idea just sort of like landed in there and spent many years germinating, over which time I left Tulane. I started working at a restaurant in what I thought would be a very short-term role in Connecticut called The Dressing Room, which is an amazing farm-to-table restaurant. And I started to learn about not only cooking, but about kind of the politics and role of food in society, and was starting to understand that a lot of the things that I wanted to write about, society, identity, culture, longing, politics, economics, could all be addressed or all intersected in some way through food. And so up to that point, I had been cooking and really enjoying it, but I didn't really know if I saw it as a long-term pursuit, because while it was really like beautiful and stimulating in a tactile and a physical way, I wasn't, I was someone who really needed that sort of like intellectual stimulation as well. And I didn't have the point of entry for it at that point in food. And when I started to realize sort of the way this tied into all these bigger issues that I cared about, I was like, this is it. I have the physical work of a kitchen, the camaraderie of a kitchen, the tactile beauty of making a beautiful plate of food, and the emotional satisfaction of giving it to someone. And then there's all this other stuff that like gets my brain buzzing in a really powerful way. Plus, it was a lot easier to get people to eat food I made for them than to read a poem I wrote. So it was like geared in that direction.
Ain't that the
truth? So I worked at this restaurant for about a year and a half, and then I decided to move to New York and see if I could sort of cut it or hack it, in the city, if I was going to pursue this long term. And I ended up, after a few months, working at a restaurant called Egg, which again, I found on Craigslist. I thought would be, even my interview, I said I probably would only be there for a few months, because I still had this itch of maybe I would go back to grad school or something like that. But even with that admission, which, as you know, like nobody likes to hear when they're hiring someone that they might only stick around for a few months, George, who's now my partner in the business, decided to give me a shot as a line cook. And somehow knew that I would still be there 11 years later, regardless of what I said.
Right.
And so along the way, we opened another restaurant called Parish Hall. And it was at that time that a friend of ours was running a sort of like a food publication festival called Food Book Fair. And it was happening around the corner from our restaurant. And they'd bring in all these super cool different food magazines and have these, panels and discussions around food and publishing. And our friend Elizabeth asked if we would do a dinner, a closing meal for the festival. And George and I were throwing around ideas for it. And this thought about The Sun Also Rises came back to me. I was like, why don't we do a meal based off of a book? This is a food and books, sort of food and literary gathering, let's give this a shot. And so that was the first tables of contents dinner, and we picked 5 different passages from the book, and we printed the menu on bookmarks. So every course was on a different bookmark, and you'd read the passage and then see the dish description below that, and people could sort of taste what they had then imagined in the reading of those menu cards. And I don't know if it was because it was Hemingway and there was a lot of alcohol and people got kind of saucy that they had such a great time, but it was a real hit. And for me, I can say, was just this like amazing experience of bringing these 2 passions together into one. So we began doing this closing dinner for the Food Book Fair the following couple of years. And it went in a few different directions, and eventually we decided to bring contemporary authors into the mix, and we launched the reading series. And this was sort of a little bit more of a low-key spin on the dinner series. We would bring 3 authors in to read in person, and we'd make small snacks inspired by the passages that they read that everyone would get to eat. And then I would lead a conversation between the authors around food and creativity and writing and some of the things that I had been thinking about, which ended up overlapping in a lot of ways with the processes that these writers had been thinking about. Because to me, it's so similar. You have this idea, and I guess it's sort of the act of creativity in general, but you have this idea and you're trying to get it into the form you're envisioning it as, and end the journey between point A and point B. Oftentimes you never arrive in the place you thought you would end up in, but you go through these revisions and edits and failures, and then you finally put something together that you can give to people, and hopefully they'll enjoy it. So that reading series we held monthly until February of last year, for about 2.5 or 3 years, I think. Yeah. And many of the authors who came to the series ended up, being a part of the cookbook when we finally put it together. I'll stop there for a breath.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, is I was so struck when I was reading through it that there's so many references to the start of the pandemic. And it was really remarkable to me that we're now at a point where our cultural representation of that time, of the start of the pandemic, has now made it into a physical form. And so how did so that's how the series came about. How did the cookbook come from that? And we should say too, well, I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about Fig as well, because they seem intimately linked to me, that both kind of the start of the pandemic and the closing down of businesses, the need that came out of that, and then the development of this book. But I don't actually know if that's the case or not. Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. For both Fig and for this cookbook, the book I don't think would exist if the pandemic hadn't happened. So when we closed our restaurants in the city in the middle of March, a lot of friends were in the same boat with businesses that, couldn't operate. And we also knew how rapidly and intensively the need for assistance with food and nutrition was growing in the city, because so many people were out of work. And Fig had been kind of a informal, potlucky kind of study group that was mostly made up of restaurant owners and cooks and caterers and some people who worked in, tangentially in food. Excuse me. And we would get together every month or two and sort of try to educate ourselves a bit on issues that we might not have time to think as deeply about in the normal day-to-day of running our businesses, but that we knew were important, to our role in the food system at large. So we would have readings that we do in advance, and sometimes have guest speakers, and then come together and share leftovers from our restaurants. Someone would bring some beet dip, and someone would bring some pita, and someone would bring some pickles or cheese that was left over from a catering event. We just put out the spread and have a meal together, and we talk about pasture-raised beef, or we talk about indigenous food sovereignty, or we talk about immigration laws, and all these things that are so tied to food, and in a way that's kind of the same spark that tables of contents gave me, right? These big issues and how we could act on them as chefs and servers in the world of food. So when the pandemic hit, we had these resources and time on our hands, and as you probably know, chefs and farmers and people in food are not very good at idle time. So we all, just started a group chat and got together and hit up some of our vendors. Like, how do we get some food out to some people? And in this extremely sort of inexperienced but like beautiful way, we built up a food relief program that ended up bringing groceries weekly to 150 families around the city to their homes, so they wouldn't have to leave them during the pandemic for 9 months over the course of the pandemic. And we ran that program to the end of the year, but it was really just a kind of a grassroots, let's see what we can do, let's try to fill these gaps in the ways that we can, thing that again might not have happened if the pandemic hadn't come and affected us in the way it had. So in November, we had the idea in the past, or sort of this like hope floating in the air, that one day we might do a cookbook for Tables of Contents, because of course it sort of makes sense. We can bring the literary passages to the plate. How do we then bring those recipes back into people's homes, on the page? And I remember I sent the first email about this cookbook when it was finally like, let's see if I could reach out to a few authors. We need to raise money for FIG. One thing Tables of Contents might be able to do, since we can't do events, is somehow share recipes, and maybe we could sell them, or do something to raise some funds. And I thought I might reach out to authors to see if they would contribute recipes from their home kitchens. And so I sent out a handful of emails, maybe the day before Thanksgiving, and got immediate responses from everyone saying, yes, I'd love to do this. And so then I was in. I couldn't back out. Like, I had to figure out a way to make a book. And it came together. I mean, in the publishing world, having done a cookbook, how long these timelines are. I mean, from November to it was published in February, like less than 3 months, which was incredible. We got all the recipes from these authors. We edited them. We found this amazing designer, Mariah Rodriguez, who put the whole book together. George from Egg, did the copy editing and text layout. We found 20 different illustrators from around the country to contribute illustrations paired with the different recipes. And we found this amazing publisher, Radix Media, here in Brooklyn, that also lined up with our values. They're worker owned, they're part of a union, and they agreed to make this book and really made such a beautiful thing. And then we were able to get folks to be excited about it. So, I mean, with no press or publisher, apparatus, we have almost sold the first run of 1,000 copies in just over a month and a half, which is like incredible. And we're on track to raise about $10,000 for FIG. So these are kind of like the silver linings that, if I had been, if the restaurant had been running, regularly, I might not have had the time or space or the constrictions at the same time. Like, I couldn't cook, I couldn't feed people directly, which is what I'm so used to doing. And it made me search for other ways to reach folks. And that's how the book came to be.
Can you talk a little bit about the illustrations are really incredible with it too. And I think, so engaging with each recipe, and they feel different and yet cohesive. Can you talk a little bit about the illustrators that were involved as well?
Yeah, for sure. At first, the idea was that Mariah, who was designing the overall book, she was down to do all the illustrations. And we quickly realized that was an enormous amount of work. There's no way. Number one, we should ask that of her, to volunteer time to do all. It's 41 different recipes in the book, each of them, particular style. And we wanted the illustrations to really speak to the recipe, to really be in conversation and not just be a photo or kind of a standard, style all the way through.
Wait, it's Naima just joined us.
Sorry?
Oh, really?
The contributor just joined us.
Oh, Naima, are you here?
She's here. She's here.
The gallery view to spot her. Oh yeah, I see you. Hey, Naima. So we same way that we got same way we got all the authors, we just started sending emails out to illustrator friends that we knew to see if they'd be down to throw a couple illustrations in. And again, people were so generous, and I think this was one of the most beautiful things that came out of all the all the pain of last year. The generosity with which people just poured forth and said, yeah, of course, I'd love to do 1 or 2 or 3 illustrations. for this book. And it was just sort of an expanding of the community cookbook sort of ethos into every part of the process. So it was an assembly of recipes from our community of writers, a collection of illustrations from our community of designer and artist friends. That felt, once we thought of that, we realized, of course, this is how it has to be. It has to sort of, dig into that community spirit as much as possible. And that made it better, which we know from our work in food, especially, the more diverse your community is, whether it's on your farm or in your restaurant and neighborhood, the stronger everything's going to be. So yeah, that's how it came to be.
That's such an interesting phrase, of course, this is how it had to be, because I think that really resonates with me, that there's so many things that we do, if it's in our restaurants or in our lives, or that are done with intentionality, that just seem then to be obvious, and yet they're not always replicated across the industry. And that's something, I think, when you and I first met, we were talking a bit about that. And I know, I guess I'm just so kind of curious about how that is continuing to play out for you, because we've talked a little bit in the past, and I was hoping to talk tonight too about just sort of like what happens next, and I think it's something that we're all sort of grappling with. But I was just thinking about this. So it's a little bit of a diatribe, but I was saying to you earlier that it was pleasantly surprising to not be able to find tables of contents on Amazon. And I mean, I think Amazon, I feel sort of mixed about it. Like, obviously there's lots of downsides, but living rurally, it does make a lot of things very accessible that wouldn't be accessible to parts of our community. So it's not an unmitigated thing. And yet it was just so pleasant to be like, oh yeah, there's another way to do it. And I feel like both of the types of food that we make, and the communities we're trying to support, it's like, oh, there are other ways to do this. And I feel like the pandemic has both, like you were saying, everybody just suddenly poured forth in this way that has always been there. Like, I think, food communities are notoriously generous, and find extra hours in the day. But I also wonder about the just intense amount of, like, it's just been so taxing on people who work in frontline jobs. And so I wonder how much of those things that just take a little bit of extra effort, but we think are the of course, will stay. And I wonder, kind of if you've had thoughts on that. I mean, I think all of us have just kind of been sitting at home thinking a lot, and working obviously too, but it's sort of inescapable. Kind of what your thoughts are for that, for the restaurant, for publishing, all of those sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I still know very little about publishing, so I'll leave that aside. But yeah, in the restaurant world, honestly, the experience with Fig has been so steadying and reassuring about the things that we felt or thought we felt or knew about how we wanted to operate businesses. And we've just seen the dividends in the work over the past year, of certain approaches that may take a little bit more work at one level, but in the long run, just build so much more security, equity, resiliency into systems, and ultimately create a greater benefit for a greater number of folks in the network. And I think that's it's hard. It's been really hard, especially this past year. I mean, everyone knows what it's like in the restaurant world to be asked to cook a million different events and donate all these resources. And we always sort of find ways to do it, but it doesn't mean it's not hard. And it doesn't mean that finding ways to pay your employees better and sourcing from 20 different locations instead of one distributor, it is easy. But you realize, and I think we saw this in the early stages of the pandemic, when some of the bigger levers of our industrial food system started to fail, that the local resiliency emerged, with farmers quickly pivoting to CSAs to get their food away from restaurants who weren't serving and into customers' homes directly. Chefs switching to virtual cooking classes to share knowledge with people. Everyone's swapping recipes and ideas on Instagram or Facebook or whatever network you use to connect with folks. And therein you can see like the stronger your network was before you needed it, the more kind of gracefully, and deliciously you will be able to make it through what happened last year. And at the same time, I think it's even more difficult now in some ways, and for some folks to consider taking some of the what you might call extra steps in their businesses to increase equity, to increase sustainability, because in one way of looking at things, we just have to sort of shrink up and do whatever we can to hold on to what we have and make it through this. And we've got to trim all the fat. And there's some, I guess, level of that where that's true. But from our experience with FIG, from my personal experience, I'll say the community that I've been in touch with and have been inspired by throughout this whole process, who are building all of these amazing principles into their business, and I'm watching them thrive as much as anyone could this year, and I'm being buoyed by seeing them work that way, and I'm offering things that can support something they might be trying to do that we've done at Egg in the past. This like interchange of mission and values and support, and this idea of kind of abundance and generosity, I think is leading in the right direction. And I think some people have also noticed that over the past year. I think there have been lots of revelations about about how insufficient the way restaurants run has proven to be on all sorts of levels, from the way some customers have valued or not valued, the role of food service workers in a restaurant or in the field, the way some restaurant owners have valued or not valued their employees and provided the most basic kinds of support and safety for them. And so, with all that was sort of exposed and unearthed, not only in the food world, but I can't help but think there's going to be some lasting impacts in the way people choose to operate. And like with anything, it's going to go in many directions. There's not going to be one direction that everybody goes in. And there's, I have the fear that it's just going to be all chain restaurants and fine dining after this is over, and the neighborhood places aren't going to make it. But then I have all this hope from the, creative pastry and pizza and personal food pop-ups that are happening on Instagram and selling out and offering like a new entryway into the food world that maybe wasn't accessible before, and the kind of funding that's been introduced, particularly for minority, chefs and restaurant owners and operators, to access resources that we, hadn't intentionally enough allocated that way before. I think, like with any, active destruction, there's going to be a kind of rebirth and, a creation of something slightly different, but hopefully, hopefully better suited, for the world we want to have. I don't know that will happen, but that's my hope.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's something where I have been so buoyed by people just paying more attention, and maybe it's because they have more bandwidth by having fewer things to do, and fewer places to go. But I think, I think that is just right, that it's going to happen a bunch of different ways, and it's going to have to take folks staying engaged and staying interested and deciding that I was so struck last spring, and we've seen it again this spring, just the sheer outpouring of support, but also demand at our farm. Grainer had we used to never open our farm stand to the public until Memorial Day weekend, and we would always do an honor system, and it was like we would sell 20 bags of spinach or whatever. And we had a line like 2 miles long, and part of that's because it was so socially distant. So it was probably only like a half mile, but still, and it was, people were just, I think they had the time to stand in line, and they suddenly they really cared about where their dollars went. And I was thinking, if this is something that stays in place, if the foundational work of the local food movement and the delicious movement, really self-actualizes here, like that feels like an incredible thing. But then, like you were saying about Tunde Way has done so much work on, maybe we should just let the restaurant industry die. I mean, even run by the best people, it is an industry that is predicated upon making unsustainable choices. If it's on the backs of workers, on the backs of the planet, on the backs of the farmers, on the backs of the animals, all of those things. And yet it feels like the death of the restaurant industry will be all chains and the fine dinings of the world that is a month's rent to be able to go, which are really important, I think, in our system. I'm not trying to underplay that, but it does feel like that sort of independent restaurant, it does feel threatened in a way. And I wondered a little bit about that connection with art and literature, and thinking about, like, is the future for restaurants going to be a subsidized one, where it's subsidized by sort of the increased stratification of wealth or something like that. And I mean, there's something that feels not terrible about that, but it also feels really hard to say, like, so many people came to this country and were able to, move into the middle class by running a restaurant. And I don't know that that is still a lot of our situations. I don't know. I don't have a question, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And I mean, when you think about it, of course, like when we're talking about those kinds of restaurants that might survive the chains and fine dining, for example, in one imagining of the world, those are heavily subsidized restaurants. We know that every chain restaurant is heavily subsidized by the kind of, farm subsidies that maybe we'd like to see change and support a different kind of agriculture, and the kind of, subsidies that are essentially provided by not having to provide a living wage or health insurance, that are then borne by society. And then in the fine dining restaurant, it's often, a pet project for someone who has a lot of money and wants to, make something beautiful for the people in their community. But yeah, I think the one thing that makes me feel hopeful about that is, I think one thing I've seen is the neighborhood restaurants, the truly neighborhood restaurants, not restaurants that are in a place and trying to cater to someone else, or
it's an important distinction.
Yeah, restaurants that are really trying to serve their community have kind of, there's obviously a lot of experience here, but have shown really hopeful signs of succeeding, because everyone's been in their neighborhood and hasn't been, in New York at least, I haven't been going to other neighborhoods to eat out. I've been going to the places that I love around me when I can, and those places I think are going to be okay. There's like an interesting thought that comes to mind about the difference between mutual aid, which is like sort of community-based and localized, and subsidization, which is like not as intentional and much, bigger, and there's like more distance somehow, and a different power structure between, the person or the entity that's lifting up the thing. And we've seen so many beautiful examples of mutual aid happening here in the city on all sorts of different levels. And that could be cooks who are out of work pitching in to help a friend get their startup off the ground because they really believe in it. And I think that sort of spirit will lead to like an emergence of a new crop of restaurateurs and people in food that are doing things, hopefully, in a way that's building a system that is worth keeping alive, and not a system that is built on the backs of slavery and destructive agricultural practices.
Which I guess, sorry, it occurs to me that it would be worth, I would imagine most of the people who are watching are not in the food industry. Are there things that feel like ways for you to tell, if you're looking at a restaurant that you don't know the owner, you don't know the folks, that you sort of get a sense for whether or not they're making choices that you believe in?
I think it's hard to tell, to go back to literature, not to judge a book by its cover. The sort of farm to table greenwashing sort of thing has taken hold in lots of ways that are not as true to the mission as you might hope they might be. But I think the best way, like you described with this 2-hour line at the farm to buy vegetables, is to pay attention, and to, if you go somewhere and you love it, chat with the server, chat with the manager, chat with the owner, get to know them. I feel like that really happens in lots of beautiful ways. And maybe that's for us in the service industry. Like we might know, we go into a restaurant and you know someone and you really get a sense of what's happening in the place. But I think anyone can do that. Anyone can be, you are a patron of a restaurant when you go in there and you have a relationship with it and you have a relationship with the person who's serving you, and to sort of lean into that relationship is the best way to know more about anyone or anything, right? To get into the personal, level of stuff, and ask questions. I mean, that's the way that I try to do it. And I also want to say, I don't, there's varying degrees of success in all of these pursuits, and folks that are trying to do their best, in any number of ways. We never achieved everything I wanted to achieve at Egg, and living up to every single one of our values, but we're constantly pushing and trying to get there. And so I think you need to support folks that are just well-intentioned and are trying to do things well and are open to suggestions and, moving in a certain type of direction. And that is a powerful role that customers have to play, because I know a lot of restaurants who may want to do things a certain way, but are afraid that they might lose customers if they raise menu prices 10% so they can try to get their employees health insurance, or they might lose staff if they change the way their tips or their payment structure are put together. So it really requires a buy-in and an understanding and communication between all parties, to open the door to get to that, the place I think that many of us want to see restaurants get to.
Which I think is a really good point too. I mean, across all spectrums of life, that it's not just the end result, but it's the attempt to get there. And the famous quote that was going around by Maya Angelou that became a meme, when you know better, then do better. And and that there's no shame in not being perfect. No one's going to get to that point, but also because the goalposts are always moving,
Right.
And I think chefs know that. And I would assume writers know that as well, that you can edit until the end of
Right.
time. But, at some point you have to send it in.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's interesting. And just the idea that, there was a woman who has a podcast, the Mouthy podcast. She was actually at that chef summit, and I'm blanking on her name right now. But she was always talking about, if you want to find a way to do better, think about what's the chink in your armor, and what's the thing that's on your menu or in your fridge that you just really hope nobody asks about. It's just don't ask me where I'm getting the butter, because it's from the big box whatever, and then fix that, and then what's the next thing. And I think that's really true of life too. But anyway,
yeah, totally. It's you have to take yourself to culinary therapy a little bit and be what am I hiding from in myself?
Yeah. And the collective sort of I think Davida Davison, who I know we both really respect, was talking about this at the start of the pandemic. She was like, ooh, all the people who are just praying that their former employees don't speak up, that what a terrible way to live. And that seems for sort of the first step in just don't treat people poorly. It goes a long way. But
I love what Mary said in the chat, that there is a feeling you can get if you go to a place regularly enough, and this is exactly what we're talking about, right? Really getting to know somewhere, and when you do that, you can feel that there's an intention, a love, an encouragement, and an investment in the whole body of the restaurant, which includes the customers and the farmers and the staff. And that feeling I think can be really visceral. And that's, hopefully the kind of place that you can encourage to continue to be that way and do what you can to support their efforts.
Do you find this a similar sort of pursuit when you're exploring literature and books and writing?
Yeah, I think so. I think, one thing that's been amazing about Tables of Contents is, the most amazing thing for me is developing relationships with the writers who have taken part and I really feel like I have snuck in like the back door of the literary world that I never would have been able to like get into based on my own writing skill. And just, hey guys, I've got food. Like, who wants to eat? Let's talk. And that's how it all happens. But you get to know writers, and I think the reason that Tables of Contents has grown the way it has is because we found really great people to take part in the series, and then they've recommended friends. And so the folks who have come through have been like, basically, as far as I'm concerned, vetted by folks whose opinions I really respect and who I can trust because they know better than I do what they're talking about. Kind of the role chefs can play, for customers about farmers. You can really sort of share knowledge that you spend a lot of time accumulating and spread that to a broader audience of people. And so through those, writers have also gotten to know their publishers and some of the smaller press publishers who have been so incredible to work with. Like, the Riverhead imprint has been a huge supporter. Grey Wolf has been a great partner. Coffee House, Sarah Bonde, like just all these different publishers out there. Grand Central, and I don't really know how the whole system's built. So some of those may be part of bigger, operations, but I know that the people who run them are really intentional folks and really care about their authors and promoting the kind of work that they really believe in. So I ended up reading a lot, which is great too. I'm like forced to read a ton of books. But I think it's sort of by setting our intention in the beginning, and part of that intention has been to highlight what we call like the contemporary canon, which is a diverse array of voices, particularly BIPOC and women voices, who are telling stories about the world, right now in new ways. The same kinds of folks who want to, essentially want to support in the food and ag world as well. It's been really incredible to sort of find a way into that community and learn from each author who comes through what it means to them to like tell a good story and to tell a true story, and what it takes to get to the end result. I've sort of like lost track of the question, but like that process.
Me too. I'm just like, yes.
that process of just, building community in the literary world around food has been, I didn't have a goal when we started Tables of Contents, goal as it were. I just wanted to have people over for dinner like I always do. But it's really been, again, in hindsight, the goal that was the sort of course, as I said before, of course it had to be this way. Of course it had to progress in this honest, community-driven, fashion. And that's why it's gotten to where it is now.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because I was so struck by how many of the authors I was learning about for the first time through this book, and that's because I don't spend that much time on a contemporary canon. And and I find it's funny, it's sort of like how people will say like, I want to eat better, I want to shop more sustainably, and I just don't know the way in, or I want to cook more at home and I don't know how to combine things without following a recipe directly. And I just think that it's so fascinating how that is both replicated across industries and trying to find those new voices or people that you like without feeling like you're slogging through it. And I think you're right on to say, you find the one person whose work you really love, and then, who do they really love and who's influencing them. And I think that's true across, the art world, the music world, all of those sorts of things. And it's also interesting to me how that creative process, the actual physical creation of this work probably follows something similar, and everyone's individual process is probably a bit different. But my husband's a musician, and we speak a common language because, acidity and timbre relate, or the rhythm is sort of mimicked by those bass notes that are in kind of long phrases or things like that. We don't really talk about it that much anymore, but when we first started dating, it was really neat to find that sort of shared vocabulary. And I imagine that that's true across the spectrum. So in thinking about it, there's sort of 3 different ways that that's being touched in this book, and that just, again, I don't really have a question. I just think that that's really neat.
Again, a perfect question. My wife's a musician also, so we talk about the same sorts of things. And we did a dinner maybe 4 or 5 years ago with this writer, Heidi Julavitz, who's an incredible writer. Her book, The Folded Clock, is this kind of like fictionalized diary that is just so beautiful. And we did a dinner on the theme of decay.
Well, that
And
sounds
so
fascinating.
she prepared some elements to the night around like decay and thought and language, and created a playlist. And then every dish that we prepared had some element of preservation or decay or rot or something in there, and some sort of like that they were sort of in conversation. And I was talking to my wife Rachel at some point. I think she had used the phrase sympathetic resonance, which is a music phrase for how certain pitches that aren't activated in an instrument resonate in sympathy with certain other pitches that are activated. And there's like, it gives like an atmosphere to that. I'm probably describing this like horribly wrong because I'm not a musician, but it's something like this. Basically, like,
she hasn't burst into the room yet to correct you, so.
No, I told her she has to stay over there because I'm gonna get she can correct me off camera.
Yeah.
But that idea resonated so much with me in how you create a dish where like certain flavors really do have this like kind of connection to another flavor, and it's not direct. It might sort of be like floating in your palate a little bit, but without knowing, they're amplifying and responding to whatever that central flavor is of the dish. And again, I think you just find like in our terminology and the ways we create so much overlap, whether it's music or painting. You can obviously think of a number of ways, visual art comes into play, or writing. And it's so beautiful and so exciting to explore, and just offers another sort of area of creativity as a chef. And any inspiration is always like an exciting one to be exposed to. So.
Yeah, and it's just fun, as we were talking, I was thinking about that dinner, the elements of decay, and just how fun that must have been to put together. And I feel like that's one of the other things that I've been sort of reacquainted with in my life in the last year is like, I don't know, this is sort of broad sweeping, but before the pandemic, there were times where it was just so busy that I was just like, 80% is going to do it, and that's what I can give. And that's the amount of bandwidth I have. And then in our household, we've had a lot of conversations about starting to say yes to fewer things, and then really sort of diving in a little bit more. And my friends, Nick and Sarah Tyson, who own Loma Farm and Farm Club up in Leelanau County, we were talking to them once, and I did a dinner with them back in 2019. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, you guys, this is making more work for you. And they were like, yeah, but that's the work we want to be doing. So like, yes, it'll take more work, but it's good work, and it's work that's fulfilling, and trying to separate that between like, I don't know, indeliberate's like a little bit of an overused term, but sort of like the busy work from the work that you want to spend the effort on. And it seems like that's true in so many different parts of the world as well. But.
Yeah, I think this year has given more space to many people, and sort of figuring out how to engage with that space, even if it's just taking different shapes than it did for you in the past, and how then you want to choose to either refill that space as we go forward or not, and what your relationship to time and engagement with activities and space that is separate from those things, that'll be an interesting series of choices for everyone to make as we go forward. And I think it's good. I think it's good to have that space, because like you say, if you're at 80, 90, 100% all the time, as I said, this book wouldn't have happened, right? And it's something I loved so much and was so excited to do, but it wouldn't have happened without that kind of forced quiet, that kind of forced step aside from the rhythm I was so familiar with.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, even in talking, I was just thinking about how, in some ways it doesn't feel like a privilege that we've had that space, because, your business is shut down, and lots of people's businesses are shut down, and lots of people are without work. And a lot of people have been working harder than they've ever worked, because they have, they're just holding it together, or their industry, like I think about, meat processors or grocery store workers that are just working crazy amounts. And there's a movement for rest reparations that I find really fascinating. And this idea of, if you can give, specifically, I think targeted at women of color and Black women specifically, the space to just rest and what that would mean. And so this idea of maybe taking this prized space that we've all kind of come to appreciate, even though we've bristled against it for so long, what it would mean to pass that forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think
that's something that we found with that I found engagement with in and through FIG as we try to navigate who does what work and what work needs to be done is being intentional about where we assign, certain types of work and certain types of rest or stepping back from the process. And I love that idea so much. I feel like rest reparations for everyone, essential workers, especially, so many undocumented immigrant communities who have been working nonstop because they can't access government, relief during this time. There's an enormous amount of, we talk about wealth inequality, but this is kind of like rest inequality that's happened over the past year as well that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Evan, it's so fun to talk with you. And I'm just so grateful that you're here. Because Naima is on the call, I was wondering if she's willing to unmute and join the conversation and maybe talk a little bit about the recipe, if only just to tell us officially how it's pronounced, because before you joined, Evan and I are both saying we've only ever read this or said it aloud to ourselves and never in public. So if you're willing to come on, I'll stop talking.
I'm flipping through and seeing so many friendly names too. Hey, Emily. Hi, Naima.
Hi.
How's it going? Yeah, I can hear
you. Good. It's bedtime in my house, so things are a little nutty, but, which is why I had my mic and camera drop. But I can hop on to say that it's pronounced Changwa.
Changwa.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting.
Yeah, and my mother-in-law has made this for me. She's Colombian. I've had it in Colombia when visiting family, my husband's family in Bogota, and it's just like a wonderful. I suppose we can have soup for breakfast, like a wonderful breakfast soup that's comforting if you're sick or hungover or just need like a little love. And yeah, I love it so much, and I'm so glad that it's in the cookbook.
It's so good. I had it for breakfast this morning and it was delicious. It was so easy. It's like 5 ingredients. I don't know if there's something about the milk. I've never poached eggs in milk, but they came out so beautifully. It was like maybe the milk is doing something to the way the eggs are poaching. Yeah. But then it also made me think it's kind of like biscuits and gravy, in spirit. It's just like it's thinner, but when you're dunking bread in there and sopping it up and eating the eggs, it's like, oh, I know this. And I mean, that's always an amazing experience for me when, there's something that's brand new, but triggers like this memory of like, oh, I know something about this, even though I never had it before. It's really cool.
There was also like a little mini egg hunt that happened in my kitchen as I was like I had, made the base, and I was just going to have a little bit before this talk, and we're going to have the rest for dinner tonight. And I was like trying to find the egg, but it's like everything is white. And so I was just like looking for texture, which was such a nice little hunt for it. But yeah. And how did Chingwa relate to the reading that you did, or why was it what you wanted to submit to the book?
I'm not sure why I wanted to submit it. I think that it's because it was something that actually felt intimidating for me to make, although it's so simple. Like, I think the poaching of the eggs felt intimidating. Like, I felt afraid of milk and scallions and cilantro all together. But it is something that I sort of learned to trust my instincts on. So it was like interesting to try to create a recipe, but the way my mother-in-law describes it, she's like, like, let the milk get hot, but not too hot, like not so that it burns, and as much scallion and cilantro as you want. And so it's simple, but it still felt like an opportunity to get my bearings and feel comfortable. And I just like love it. It's like comfort food, and it feels like one of the ways I've come into this chosen family.
It really is a trust fall, because you drop the egg in and you can't see it. So you just kind of have to like Okay, I think in 3 minutes it's gonna be ready.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so good. It's just like it's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it reminded me a little bit, my grandfather would always have like a rice porridge that's in milk that was like a little bit, it's not sweet like rice pudding, and probably about the texture of a congee, but like a sweetened congee with some like raisins in it or whatever. And so it was such a like mind play that I was like, I took the first bite and I think I was expecting that, even though I know none of those flavors were in it. And then it was like so savory with the egg and the scallions and the cilantro. So thank you so much for contributing it and letting us cook with it and joining us tonight. So nice to see your face.
Yeah. Thank you both for making it and sharing the wonderful images on Instagram. I shared them with my mother-in-law. She was so thrilled.
Of course. It's so beautiful. I mean, when I wasn't even trying to make it look like Erica's painting, but it ended up, once you crack the eggs, like that is how it looks. It's like gorgeous, simple, array. Yeah, thanks for coming through tonight too. I'm excited to talk on Wednesday.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk. Thanks for doing this and for allowing me to watch.
And just a reminder, everyone, this is Naima's new book. It's so good. Please go get it. What's mine and yours? Get it from the library or buy it. Either way, it's fine.
Either way is good.
And you guys are going to be in conversation?
Yeah, on Wednesday on Instagram Live, on the Tables of Contents account, we're going to be doing a series called TSC Snacks, which is kind of like the virtual version of our old reading series. So we'll be snacking and talking about the book, and I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I have something to drop off for you. I'm going to bring it by your place tomorrow or Wednesday if you're around.
I'll be around. I won't be anywhere else. I'll be here. All right. Thanks, you too.
Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So I guess there's a total wrap up. So Wednesday, you and Emma are talking again on Instagram Live. You can buy the Tables of Contents book through your website, tablesofcontents.org, and Evan has offered to sign any of those books. And so because he's also mailing them all, he's both producing, like production department and shipping department. So you can place that order there, or there are a handful of independent bookstores that are carrying it. I'm also currently running a giveaway for a copy of it on my Instagram. So if anybody wants that, or if you want specific recipes, I'm sure we can find them too. But yeah, is there anything I missed?
One question.
Yeah.
What do you think? Can you sub cilantro for folks who don't love cilantro?
Oh. Probably. I would just use parsley probably.
Parsley.
Yeah, or sage might be good also. Like sage and milk is always like a tasty thing. So it would be different, but I think it could be good.
Cool.
Yeah.
I had just a comment, you guys. I just think this is such a beautiful book. And what's so neat for folks who are living in Leelanau County is this is food that we don't really have access to. A lot of it is food we don't have access to at restaurants here right now. But the ingredients are accessible. Like especially I was just looking through, you get them all at Oriana. And so that's just such a neat thing. Yeah,
it's quite a wide range. Everything from like mac and cheese and tuna salad to aloo keema and malaga rasam, like all these different recipes. So you can kind of push yourself as much as you want to, or just make like a delicious.
And grape nut custard, you guys.
Oh, it was really good. I made that for my mom because my mom loves grape nuts.
Man, when I was a little kid, it was like half grape nuts, half sugar.
I'll also say just an amazing connection. You were mentioning the tuna salad from Julie Bunton. I think is how you pronounce her last name. She's from the Petoskey area. So she's from Northern Michigan originally. And I was doing a little internet snooping because I, of course, latched onto that when I was flipping through, and now is teaching at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So she's back at it. There's always a local connection.
her and her husband Gabe are both incredible authors, both novelists. So I would recommend checking out their work too.
Oh, cool. Okay. So we have a copy. The Leelanau County Libraries have a copy of the book too, and you guys can, if you're in Leelanau County, you can put it on reserve.
Evan, thank you so much. I mean, this is now our second conversation we've ever had, and there really have all been winners. So I hope that we have a third one at some point.
And thank you for having a copy of this in the library. This is the first library it's in. It's like a dream of mine come true to have a book in the library. It's so cool.
Oh, amazing.
It's so cool. It's so cool. It's such a neat book.
Thank you.
So much. Thank you guys both for tonight. Can we do like we can do a double wave again? Everybody in the audience, double wave. I love it. It makes you guys, the double wave makes me so happy. Love it. Thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. This was just so
fun.
And we're looking forward to just following the work that both of you are doing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I can't wait to share a meal soon.
I
Someday.
hope so too. Yeah, I really hope so too. And if you're around in May, we're going to talk with Shauna Seaver from Midwest Made. She wrote a real tome to Midwestern baking. So she's going to come on in May and talk too. So it'll be all baking stuff. But yeah, I hope that we can get together and cook together sometime again soon. So
that's Monday, May 10th, 7 p.m. on Zoom.
Laura's does the actual work. I'm just like, this is it. I have it. That's great.
Thanks for the wine also.
Oh, of course. Yeah, thank you to Bell Lago.
Bell Lago, thank you for the wine. That was a really neat
Thanks
thing.
to everyone who tuned in. So good to see your virtual faces. Thanks for having me, Abra, Laura.
We'll talk soon.
Mark.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Allison.
Bye, Laura. Thanks.
Bye.
Great job, as always.
Thank you, Allison. I missed your poetry workshop.
Oh, dagnabbit.
I hope it went well.
It did. Thank you. It did. Except for I kept freezing. So we're going to have the open mic night. We're going to host it over at Sylvia's across the street. So you can feel free to be a part of that if you want.
Oh, cool. Okay. I'll reach out to Sylvia. Sylvia and I are good friends.
Gans?
Sylvia
Gans?
Oh, no. I thought you were talking about Sylvia Mertz.
No, Sylvia Gans, she's
Sylvia
the president of but you can get the link from Cora.
Okay, cool.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you, dear. That was really great. You do a great. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
It really was so great, Laura. Thank you so much, as always.
That was just so neat. It's such a neat book. I'm so glad. I never would have come across it without you.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad.
Yeah, I wasn't brave enough to make the recipe, but.
Well, you can come over. We've got loads. So, all right.
Actually, bye.
We'll talk to you soon. All right. Say hi to your kids.
Thank you, Abra.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Bye-bye.